You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today we are talking about where have all the movie comedies gone. And now, here's Steve.
Hey guys, hey everybody, welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, where there is all the mirth in the world that is missing from the movie theaters. I personally, being a comedy writer, I'm trying to fill that gap. But meanwhile, when was the last time you went to the movies to laugh out loud? Or when was the last time you told your friends you've got to see this comedy? And that is the $64,000 question. There's silence. There's silence.
Let me pick it up here, Steve. I always refer to a meeting I had in one of the studio commissaries. I'm going back 25 years probably, when I'm having lunch with a few of the studio execs, and another exec came in with a data sheet, and he was screaming, look at this, the data. The last three comedies have hit comedies back in. And I said, I didn't know comedy was out.
Yeah.
But the fact is that comedy has been out for a long time for movies that you see in the theaters. So we're going to talk about that today. Julian, your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, Arthur, that you had mentioned to me recently about an AFI list. So would you talk about that? Because I remember I was interested in that.
Yes, I will talk about that. And I'll tell you that looking over the top 100 comedies, at least as far as AFI is concerned, American Film Institute, virtually all of them are from a long time ago. You don't see too many that are recent. Look at things like, Blazing Saddles, 1974, MASH, 1970. These things are really pretty old. We're not rich in comedies for recent years.
What is
Big Fat Greek Wedding was,
Is that the newest one, Arthur?
Maybe it could be. I haven't literally seen every one of these, but it's really that comedy's out of style. We don't know why.
I had David Zucker on my podcast. David Zucker was the co-writer director of Airplane, arguably one of the funniest movies ever made, that plays and plays and plays. He's had trouble getting his movies going. If David Zucker the maker of Airplane can't get a movie made, what does that say? I think there's multiple things we can talk about today. I would first like to say that the great comedy filmmakers are either aging out, are done, or moving on to drama. Even somebody like Judd Apatow. Judd Apatow, probably the master of the romantic comedy in the early 2000s. When was the last time he had a movie out there, a Judd Apatow movie? Albert Brooks in the 80s and 90s made regular funny movies. Albert Brooks now does drama. What does that say?
Well, one thing it says, I think, is that we need to look at a little history of what's going on generally in the movie theater business. And the history says that there's a demarcation point for things having changed. And that demarcation point was COVID in 2020. Something happened. And what happened was that movies that people like ourselves, or people, let's say 40, 50 years plus, who enjoy a comedy or a good drama, story-driven projects with character-driven things, what happened with COVID was we found out we could watch these movies on a big screen at home and have snacks at home, go to the bathroom when you want to go to the bathroom, put it on, put it off. And that has really changed the business in terms of our demographic. That is the demarcation point. That said, you have to go back. I'm looking here at Something About Mary, 1998. Is rated to be the 27th best comedy. I'm not seeing anything more recent. But
What do they
comedies,
show as the top five, Arth?
yeah. Top five are Some Like It Hot, they rate number one,
1959.
1959. Tootsie, 1982. Tootsie was a great movie, funny movie. Some Like It Hot was a classic. Doctor Strangelove, that black dark comedy, what a movie that was. Number three. Annie
1964.
Hall, number four.
Annie Hall.
And Duck Soup, surprises me, 1933, number five. Blazing Saddles, number six. MASH, seven. I'll take it through 10. It Happened One Night, 1934, as number eight. The Graduate, nine. And Airplane, there you are, at 10.
Well, it's interesting. From my point of view, I'm only interested when I'm doing these kind of things and what really made me laugh. Because it's not that I sit there with my arms folded on my chest, as a lot of people do in the comedy stores, in nightclubs, but I'd like to hear well, the first one, I mean, it's not in any order, but the original In-Laws with Peter Falk and Alan Arkin and Richard Libertini, who all three of whom I'm happy to say I produced for in different versions of different things I did, was so funny. And I was interested because Andy Bergman, who was one of Mel Brooks's writers in Blazing Saddles, wrote it, and they came to him because Peter and Alan wanted to work together. And Andy got so excited because to him, it was like the tortoise and the hare. I mean, when you see Alan, for example, in Catch 22, he's a great hysteric. He can really play that. And Peter, as we all know from Columbo and many other things, is a kind of slow, deliberate kind of a guy. And he got very excited about the concept of the two of them together. So the In-Laws is the first one for me. You guys have, I mean, I don't want to keep going. So any of you guys have something where you really laughed out loud on one film or two?
Well, yes, let's go back to In-Laws for a second. My partners and I owned and operated the movie theaters on Martha's Vineyard. There were 4 theaters in different places, Oak Bluffs and Vineyard Haven and Edgartown and what have you. And we owned those theaters from somewhere in the 1970s right through the 80s. And probably the biggest movie we ever had in terms of box office, lines around the vineyard to see this movie, was In-Laws.
Huh.
The demographic, of course, of the vineyard is upscale and all that, but we played a lot of hit movies on the vineyard, and most of them did business. Foul Play in those days, Heaven Can Wait was huge, Grease was huge, but I'm telling you, nothing was bigger than the In-Laws. The audience, they loved that movie.
I think that the whole idea of going to the movies, people go for many different reasons, but the joyousness that can come from sitting in a theater packed full of people all laughing is it's contagious. And I think you would point to the fact that we live in a very stressful world right now. Every day the headlines are worse than the next. We need comedy. They used to say that during the Great Depression, one of the biggest genres of film was comedy. Comedy was bringing the people out, the era of the screwball comedy. And of course, silent times, you had Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. Comedy has always been king in Hollywood. But I want to work on what Arthur said about distribution patterns post-COVID. I think what happened with COVID is that the obvious thing is that people stayed home. But I also think the movie business went into a posture of event cinema. To get the people to come out of their houses, they had to create events. And what did they do? They created the franchise picture was already there. Star Wars 1, Iron Man 1, Superman 1, down the line. But even more so post-COVID, I think that event filmmaking became the predominant form, and comedies are not generally thought of as events. And I also
That's true.
yeah.
That's absolutely true. And you mentioned these Star Wars and Superman franchises, but we grew up with Abbott and Costello meeting everything, meeting Frankenstein. Then he met the mummy. Then they met the Invisible Man. Then they kept meeting even Charles Lawton as Captain Kidd. They made 10. Can you believe it? 10 Abbott and Costello meet for Universal, kept them alive because they were in big trouble. So that kind of franchise goes back a while. It's interesting too. Another movie that just killed me, that made me laugh but also had a philosophical bent to it, was Groundhog's Day. Very interesting film.
It was singular. It was only one ground.
Thank you. I thought like the movie, it just kept coming back and back. But anyhow, Groundhog's Day.
Now here's an interesting point, Julian. That starred Bill Murray. Bill Murray is a legendary comic actor, going way back with Ivan Reitman's Ghostbusters, and even before that. Those guys, Dan Aykroyd,
Harold Ramis,
Bill Murray, Rick Moranis. Those guys are now they're approaching 80, if they're not already 80. They're aging out. Even it was pointed out the other day that Seth Rogen, he and Evan Goldberg have been doing a bunch of comedies, very good ones. In fact, the last comedy I laughed out loud at was their comedy "This Is the End" about the rapture and the apocalypse. That was easily 11 years ago. Those guys are getting older. They're in their 40s now, but they're still in the prime. Where are the comedy voices today? We have a lot of stand-up comics, but the proven voices, now they are bringing back Reese Witherspoon, I believe, to bring another, I think they're doing another Legally Blonde, although there's some thought that it might be on streaming. I don't know if it's going to come to the theaters. I laughed at Legally Blonde. That was pretty funny.
There's a difference between, I think, comedies of any sort, and then the so-called laugh out loud comedy. Julian just mentioned that. Those are rare, but they're out there. When in Dr. Strangelove, I laugh out loud anytime I look at that scene of Sellers in the wheelchair, saluting, Hail my Führer. That stuff, that is funny. It's classic. It's to me as funny as anything I've ever seen, and it stands up today just as it did years ago. But that's laugh out loud. Laugh out loud. There's some things in Something About Mary that were really funny. Laugh out loud stuff.
Here's something that's interesting, because we hear it a lot. American comedy does not translate overseas. Now that is kind of an overall statement. I think it's been embraced by a lot of the studio executives. As you've pointed out many times, Arthur, a large portion of the box office internationally comes from overseas.
Which is one of the reasons that they're not making too many comedies lately, which is our subject.
But it was also brought up, I think you brought it up a few weeks ago, that the number one language in the world is English.
I think so, yeah.
So I think there's a certain nuance there. There's some sense, like when my writing partner and I write, we try to do some wordplay. The question is doing wordplay in comedy, which was such a part of the Woody Allen comedies for many years, and certainly Albert Brooks did a lot of wordplay. What do you think about that, Julian? Do you think the wordplay of our comedy minds may not translate? What do you think?
I think it actually doesn't, Steve. I think it's been proven that it hasn't. But a very interesting thing happened in that regard. Mel Brooks's first movie, The Producers, which was a total flop all over the world, not just in America. It flopped everywhere except New York and LA, where I'm happy to say I played it. And then 12 Chairs was a disaster, and Blazing Saddles did great here, nothing overseas. But then Young Frankenstein, wherever you are, all over the world, they know the Frankenstein monster. And with that success of the fourth movie of Mel Brooks, they went back with the other three, and they all did business. So it's an interesting thing. And you guys are both experts on the James Bonds, but we all know Dr. No from Russia with Love, okay, did all right. But boy, when Goldfinger came out, those two movies became wildly more important.
I would also say that if I were really challenged to choose the funniest movie I've ever seen, it would probably be Young Frankenstein. Only funnier thing was the outtakes of Young Frankenstein.
Yes, yes.
You know, the guys on the 20th Century Fox lot in those days, they'd all rush into the screening room to see the dailies. They became hysterical. That's out loud laughter. I mean, again, that is funny stuff. Mel Brooks just hit the nail on the in the head.
The thing I would tell executives today about, green lighting more comedies is, first of all, they don't cost $207 million a piece. You can make a very good comedy for $10 million and triple your money. See, that's another thing about this event cinema, this franchise cinema. The studios have gotten used to making movies for $200 million that hopefully will gross $1 billion worldwide. And there's this mentality, this greedy mentality, that they have to spend oodles of money. And they all claim, of course, that they want to cut their costs. But if they start greenlighting comedies, they're not that expensive.
Having worked at a studio for a couple of years, they don't really care about making a little profit. They want to they're swinging for the seats. They're going for the grand slammer. They're not interested. If you could go in and say, at least in those days, you go over and say, hey, I could make this movie for $7. I guarantee you will get 10 back. They couldn't care less. They just didn't matter. They were in a much bigger number game.
Right. Well, it's that franchise business. Once you make a Spider-Man movie for $170 million and it grosses $1 billion, you get into that mentality.
That's exactly right.
As you would too, Steve.
Yes. Another really funny movie for me, again on my laugh out loud list, was My Cousin Vinny, which I just thought it still makes me laugh. Just thinking of him, Joe Pesci and Fred Gwynn as the judge, just going back and forth, as funny as anything I've ever seen.
I've always referred to every young person as a Ute.
Yeah.
Years ago, in the early 1960s, a very, very serious producer and sometimes director named Stanley Kramer decided he was going to do the most entertaining, funny movie in the whole wide world, and made a movie called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Total entertainment. Did a lot of business, and it was very funny. But
it's my favorite comedy, Arthur.
Well, there you go. I understand. Believe me.
And on my list off,
I saw it in an audience playing. It may have been in Cinerama. It was certainly a roadshow at the time, but the audience loved the movie. Again, comedy goes with entertainment. If you're laughing, you're being entertained. And he did accomplish it. He made it happen with all those great comedians and cameos and all that. Yes, Steve.
I think that Stanley Kramer was able to assemble every comedy actor in Hollywood at that time, almost every one. Today, if you tried to do that, the movie would cost $1 zillion. You have to give a guy like that credit for shoving everybody into that, and anchored, of course, by some of the funniest comedy people ever. Milton Berle, Mickey Rooney, Buddy Hackett, Sid Caesar, Jonathan Winters, Don Knotts, everybody. And then, of course, Spencer Tracy was not really the comic part of the movie, but he kind of anchored it as the police chief. That movie, Buddy Hackett, exactly.
It's under the big W.
Peter Falk, Arnold Stang. I mean, it just kept going.
It kept going. And even the Three Stooges made a cameo. But the movie that continually makes Billy, my writing partner, and I laugh constantly, I have to turn it over to Elaine May, The Heartbreak Kid. That movie is just, it's kind of a sad movie in many ways, but it's also hysterically funny. I have to say that Eddie Albert should have won the Oscar that year for Best Supporting Actor, because the look he gives Charles Grodin, when Charles Grodin, who's on his honeymoon and wants to hook up with his daughter, Sybil Shepherd, at her finest, that scene at the table is one of the funniest.
Well, it's one of the funniest scenes in the world. There's no question. But in that movie, there was also that one scene when she tells him, when Sybil Shepherd tells Charles Grodin that there's this game I want to play. And that scene to me was perfection for comedy. And he said, "What game is that?" And she said, "Well, here's what it is. I stand by the fireplace. I take off all my clothes. You go over there, take off all your clothes, and then we keep walking to each other and seeing who gets closer, and we're both naked." And Grodin's line was, "Hello, Elaine May." His line was, "That's my favorite game."
Well, I have to say, as much as I love my friend Elaine May, it was written by Neil Simon.
Is that right? I
Yes.
thought did she
No.
not write that movie?
No, she directed it. And
Oh,
and knowing Elaine, she has probably that line she probably came up with. But he did get the credit and he did write. But it was originally based on a Bruce J. Friedman short story. So it had a kind of lot of iterations. Another movie that killed me. We talked a little. I talked a little earlier about Alan Arkin being hysterical. Nobody beats Gene Wilder as hysteria in The Producers. Nobody. With his little blue blanket, you cannot get better. And that is another movie, perhaps because we're all producers, that I related to without restraint, just screaming with laughter.
By the way, getting back to the Heartbreak Kid, for those of you who don't know, it's impossible to find these days because the company that owns it refuses to let it out there. I don't think it's ever been done in DVD, certainly not in Blu-ray. And
they remade it, Steve.
They remade it, and it's not a good remake. I mean,
I'll tell you guys this quickly. I was having dinner with Elaine May. Ben Stiller came up, who had remade it, and said, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was terrible.
No,
I mean, to show you how bad that movie was, he gets stung by a jellyfish on the beach, in the water. And his girlfriend at that time, or his fiance, they're married. It's the Jeannie Berlin character, comes over to him, takes off her bathing suit, and pees on him. That was the kind of comedy we're dealing with here.
Oh.
Yes, I would say that's not what you call high comedy. No. Another film that really made me laugh, and maybe it was because I was in co-producing and co-directing a rock and roll movie at the time, was This Is Spinal Tap. This Is Spinal Tap so hit it on the nose. I mean, I remember trying to get the rock and rollers to get there on time and realized that no matter what time I said, they were going to be late. So, of course, I changed the time to give them hours later to come. But Spinal Tap, as funny. And by the way, Rob Reiner's making a sequel right now. Or in fact, he's editing, I hear, a sequel to Spinal Tap. Now, that could give us some laughs that we're looking for, guys.
Speaking of Rob Reiner, when Harry Met Sally, that one moment in that scene in Katz's Delicatessen, when Meg Ryan fakes the orgasm and Rob's mother says that great line, "I'll have what she's having." That, again, in the theater, it rocked the theater.
Did you see the spoof on the Super Bowl, Arthur?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
It was horrible. It was horrible.
I had real trouble with watching. First of all, Super Bowl was terrible. Bad game.
On many levels.
At any level, and the halftime was unbelievable.
For those of us who didn't, tell us a little bit about what you're talking about.
Well, they did. They have an older Billy Crystal and an older Meg Ryan sitting in that same deli. And I think the product they are selling, if I'm not mistaken, is mayonnaise.
Hellman's mayonnaise.
Hellman's mayonnaise.
They're selling mayonnaise, and she starts convulsing over the taste of the mayonnaise. And Billy says, "Here we go again." And then instead of having Rob Reiner's mother in the chair, they had the young actress, the really hot actress, Sydney Sweeney, who basically says, "I'll have what she's having."
It was really bad. It was horrible.
You know what's really something, guys, is that in today's world on television, linear television especially, if you have a show that gets, let's say, 8 to 10 million viewers, you got a hit. 15 million is almost unheard of. The Super Bowl had 126 million viewers. Uh, it's mind-boggling.
Well,
And that's why the rights go for billions of dollars. The NFL. I want to just say one thing real fast, guys. I just read this the other day. Here is the total revenue of all the various major sports. Think of it. The National Hockey League total revenue is over $6 billion. The NBA is $11 billion. The Major League Baseball is $11 billion. The National Football League is $22 billion total revenue. And part of that comes from the crazy numbers they get for the Super Bowl. What a place to advertise, huh? Look at all those movies they had.
Arthur, I'm curious what auto racing revenue is, because they say the biggest crowd sport in America today is auto racing, which I think is interesting.
Well, to me, this is all comedy, real comedy. These kind of numbers just
you
make me laugh.
You guys are keeping me in stitches today, so it's okay. There you
go. Well, speaking of you, Mike, since you are our Ute, thank you. When was the last time you actually laughed in a movie theater?
In the movie theater? Good question. Because I've been making a list of the top, comedies since the year 2000. So I have a list right here. But probably the last time I laughed out loud in the movie theaters, I probably would say something like The Grand Budapest Hotel, or something like, a movie like that. Which I love the director in that.
Wes
Anderson.
Wes Anderson is, because we also saw last summer, Asteroid City was a wonderful film also that he did. His films are just so quirky and fun. And
Wes Anderson did something that very few people ever do. On Grand Budapest Hotel, on his actors, the film made so much money that he gave all the actors, all of them, pieces of the movie, and all made a lot more money than they generally make on a movie because of that. Very few people do things like that in the film, in any business, but certainly in the film business.
Now,
my final funny out loud, really, two. I have two left on my little list. The next one is The Birdcage.
Oh, Birdcage is wonderful.
That is written by Elaine May. That is directed by Mike Nichols. And Robin Williams has never been more contained as an actor and still doing great comedy stuff. And, of course, Nathan Lane, just Hank Azaria, Gene Hackman, Diane Wiest. It's an incredible movie.
Robin Williams in that is almost the straight man in that one to Nathan Lane.
When he's
no pun intended at all.
When he's encouraging Nathan Lane to walk like John Wayne, it's the most hysterical thing I've ever seen. I think finally Nathan stops and says, "Well, what'd you think? What'd you think?" And Robin says, "I didn't know John Wayne walked like that."
Yeah, that was right. And my final list of my really laughed, was the wonderful movie that the boys did, the Monty Python Holy Grail, which just killed me.
Here's another comment that's interesting. I think the predominant form of comedy in movies right now, when it does get out, is the action comedy. I think that, what I said earlier, that comedies are not generally portrayed as events, but the studios, I think when they do get comedies on the big screen, for instance, the Martin Lawrence, Will Smith comedies, Bad Boys, that's like an example of an action comedy, which is portrayed as a bit of an event. So, for instance, I was thinking of actors who I always enjoy watching them because they're so funny. Melissa McCarthy. Now, Melissa McCarthy's made a number of comedies. Either she's playing a spy or somebody brutalized by a cop or whatever. And she's very funny.
Yeah.
I was, before I was not going to say rudely interrupted, but talking about the revenue for all of the major league sports. The sports genre is very rich for comedy. Steve and I right now are working with a gentleman named David Ward, who wrote Sting, won the Academy Award for it. and he wrote part of Sleepless in Seattle, but he also did a movie that he wrote and directed called Major League. That is a funny movie. A lot of very funny scenes in it. Big hit for sure, but again, marry sports off to comedy, and you're in good shape.
Well, it also,
other movies that were funny were Slapshot, Paul Newman, The Longest Yard, when Burt Reynolds was very hot, was funny and worked, on that mix of the genre. So then there's the other thing is the scary movies that are funny. One of the funniest movies I ever saw was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein,
which supposedly ruined horror film for a couple of decades. Nobody, after seeing Abbott and Costello go to see Frankenstein, meet Frankenstein, nobody can take horror films seriously anymore.
Let me bring up something to you guys, because I'm kind of curious. I have a list of some of the top comedies since the year 2000. I'm going to read off a list, and I want to hear each one of your opinions, if you've ever seen it, or you've even heard it, or what you thought of it. Is that fair? And everything?
Yeah.
Sure.
Just to go for it. Let's start with the movie Sideways.
hated it.
You hated it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's about
Never saw it.
Paul Giamatti.
Is that the one about the
is that-
wine?
Yeah,
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I missed that one.
I liked it a lot.
I did too.
I liked it a lot. I thought it was a good movie.
I did
I'm
too.
surprised, Arthur. Really?
Some men like blue suits, men like gray suits. I always feel being honest is important. For some reason, I hated the movie. I don't know. It's just one of those things.
What about the movie Shaun of the Dead? Have you guys heard of that?
No, I haven't seen it.
I have heard of it. I did not see it.
Okay.
I did not see it, and I will continue to say that.
Okay, fair enough. What about Bad Santa?
Very funny.
Billy Bob Thornton.
Billy Bob Thornton. The bad, whenever you attach bad to something these days, it's usually a comedy.
Yes. Okay, you also have Borat. What do you guys?
Oh, that was
a
funny.
terrific movie.
That was
you know.
pretty
I thought
funny.
that was really funny.
Okay, I'll keep on going through the list. Hangover. Did you guys see
The original was funny.
the original one? I don't like the following two.
No.
Just retreads.
I never got hung.
Well, no, but for what it was great. For what it was it's like maybe it was American Pie or something like that.
Right.
Just I'm sorry to interrupt you just for a second, but there's another thing with the studios. They talk about making noise. The key to selling a movie, especially a comedy, is it's got to make noise. And what they're basically saying is a lot of noise around the water cooler. And I think The Hangover was a perfect example of a movie that was so outrageous in parts that it started to make noise. You can't do a subtle comedy anymore. You got to be somewhat outrageous, which also applies to other film genres as well, as particularly horror. You can't do a subtle horror film anymore. You got to throw buckets of blood at the screen. I think in comedy, the reason The Hangover was such a huge success is people heard about it and they wanted to see just how outrageous it was.
I agree
with that, because you also had the same thing, the 40-year-old virgin, which that made Steve Carell a movie star because he was already known for The Office at that point. And so
Mike, what's funny is there's another example of a very funny actor who's been doing dramatic roles lately.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the movie with Steve Carell and Tina Fey, but that was a funny movie, whatever it was. They were going out and having kind of all kinds of troubles.
Oh, that was The Out-of-Towners, I think it was.
Yeah, it was like a remake of that.
It was a remake, yes.
Oh, well.
I'll tell you a movie that was funny, laugh out loud, and it's the series, too. The Waiting for Guffman guys, Chris Guest.
That was next on my list, actually.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's a funny movie, guys.
Good job, Arthur. Because one of the number one movies since the year 2000 was Best in Show.
Best in Show. Hysterical.
I loved all those. I love all those movies. I think they're terrific. Really terrific.
One of my favorite movies is Mighty Wind. So, which is a wonderful, wonderful film. Even Judy and I danced to one of the songs for our first dance when we got married.
What was the movie that I know Eugene, and he's terrific, great guy, and his wife Debbie. And they were making a movie. The working title was Home for Purim, the Jewish holiday.
That's right. That's what they were doing in the movie.
The movie
Home
was
for
called
Purim.
For Your Consideration.
For Your Consideration, that's right.
Yep. That was their final movie they all did together.
Waiting for Guffman is a brilliantly funny movie. I recommend Bob Balaban. He's great in everything he's ever done. Guys, I got a story to tell you, and that is that we had a movie at United Artists a long time ago, which was produced, directed, whatever it was, by a guy named Alan Funt, who was such a successful guy from Candid Camera. And he comes up with a movie called What Do You Say to a Naked Lady? And it looked like schmutz going in. This thing did a lot of business. And basically what it was a Candid Camera kind of thing of naked women going into places where it was, somebody, send her in, she's here for a job. And in walks a naked lady. And it's the reaction of the people who confront this. A little movie that did some business. It really did. Unfortunately, Alan Funt was not one of the nicest people I've ever met. That's a whole other story. But God, was he successful with?
There's an example of a movie that created noise, Arthur, because of its.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah. We got to be noisy.
It's also an example of a movie that I was happy to launch at the Astor Theater at 45th and Broadway, and we did business
with that naked lady.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. It was.
Well, I wonder what any idea what the biggest comedy box office ever was?
Could be Tootsie.
Could probably. I actually worked on the first comedy the sequel to the first Of course, I always work on the sequel, right? The sequel to the first comedy that made $100 million at the box office, which was called Porky's.
Yeah.
Now, Porky's, when it was released in 1982, there's a perfect example of a noisy comedy because every college student heard about what was going on the screen, that they were showing full frontal nudity, FFN. That was a battle cry if you were in college at that time.
Didn't that was that the movie that was the trigger that begat a lot of those kind of movies? When was Animal House?
Animal House was 4 years early. Right? That was in 1978.
So Animal House was kind of like the first of those kind of movies, right?
Yeah, the R-rated comedy, which I think started to take over in many ways. Absolutely. And then you had Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, got a quote for you guys. From the all-time worldwide box office for comedy movies, answering your question, I did a little research. Barbie, the recent movie, is the all-time highest grossing comedy of all time.
Have we all seen it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Jules, you saw it?
I did. Well, I tried.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about, we kind of touched only on romantic movies, and we talked about Harry Met Sally, and Arthur read that Annie Hall is right up there. But we should talk about a terrific comedy, romantic one in its own way, and that was Moonstruck. I thought Moonstruck was just a terrific film.
Loved it.
Did you guys like it?
Loved it.
One of the few Nicolas Cage movies where he isn't insufferable.
Because he only had one arm.
That's Norman Jewison, guys.
Yes, it was. And boy, was that good.
Who was not a Jew.
That's right. But he kind of was. He always said, I'm a guy. What a sweetheart of a guy.
The other one in the romantic field that we have not mentioned, even though we mentioned the director of Harry Met Sally, Rob did The Princess Bride. And that is another, I think, terrific romantic comedy.
Yeah, he's funny. Rob Reiner is really one of the funny guys. He is, the old adage is either you're funny or you're not funny. He's funny, and he thinks funny, and he talks funny. He's a very talented guy. One of I think the biggest grossing comedy, Mike, that came before Barbie, I think, was My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Did $250 million.
I think it was made by Tom Hanks's company, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when Rob Reiner teamed with Aaron Sorkin to make The American President, which is one of my favorite films. I'm always quoting from that. That now is quietly. Oh, it's celebrating it's celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. The American President is 30 years old.
But that's not a comedy, Steve, is it?
I think it's very
A
funny.
little bit.
It's what you call another name that's kind of become popular. It's a dramedy.
Comedy.
Basically, it's a comedy with drama. It's a drama with comedy. There's a lot of
Also
funny
a
stuff.
rom-com if there's humor. And I don't know that it's really a comedy, but it's a wonderful movie.
Didn't do much business though, because I don't think people like to go to political movies.
It did pretty good, Steve.
Did it?
It was a hit, believe me. Yeah.
Oh, it did well. It
Yeah.
did.
Well,
The two black comedies that I found really quite unusual and played was Where's Papa and Harold and Maude.
Wow.
Both really quite interesting, and neither of them did business in New York City where you think it would kill, but around the country, especially Harold and Maude. Arthur has mentioned this, played in Boston for so long and played in Minneapolis. In certain cities, it played a year and a half. Just kept playing, getting an audience. So
We played Harold and Maude, and The King of Hearts is a double bill that played 8 years in Cambridge.
There
8
you go.
years.
There
How
you go.
about that?
And the other black comedy, which we should really talk about because it really did make me laugh, was Ruthless People. Remember Ruthless People? And
Danny DeVito.
I think that probably did quite well as
Yeah.
well.
But Paul Mazursky did a very funny movie called Down and Out in Beverly Hills.
Yep.
Dreyfuss and Bette Midler.
There
That
you go.
worked.
You also had in that era also Throw Mama from the Train. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
You know,
Billy Crystal,
we lost one of the most prolific comedy directors who specialized in teen comedies. He died at a young age, which was John Hughes. You know,
Yes.
starting with 16 Candles and The Breakfast Club, and I worked on Pretty in Pink. I worked with him, a terrific guy, and he went on to wrote Home Alone. The Home Alone comedies were really funny, but he died at a very young age.
Yes.
And, you know, Colin Higgins is another filmmaker. I always point to the Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor pairing, which produced a number of other movies. But remember The Silver Streak that Fox released. Very funny movie. And yet Colin Higgins also died very young. So we've lost.
Jill Clayburgh was a star that came in like a comet. You know, she hit, and she was terrific on the screen.
She was.
Went away fast. So she's passed away. Is that right?
Yeah.
Steve Gordon wrote Arthur, and he died very young. But Steve Gordon was a terrific guy, and Arthur was a huge hit.
Big hit. Funny movie.
Really was. But yeah, some of those guys do pass away young, and
between guys leaving to go to do drama, guys going to see the afterlife. It's, you know, the comedy ranks have become somewhat thin, and we just have to encourage the studios to take some chances on comedies and get people laughing again. I mean, there's nothing better, as I said earlier, there's nothing better than being in a theater and laughing your ass off.
There have been some concert films that worked. Richard Pryor had a big one. Eddie Murphy had a big one.
Robin Williams did. Quite a few different people did. Yes. But a lot of those comedies then went to cable. You know, they started, you know, a lot of those specials. It was less overhead than putting it out at the theaters by putting it on HBO or Netflix and such.
We had a good comedy at United Artists called Russians Are Coming, Russians Are Coming. Again, Norman Jewison.
And
worked as a comedy.
And Alan Arkin, of course. Arthur, I know that we've talked a little bit about the fact that movies have gotten so expensive over the years and the studios want to play it safe more often. Do you think the rise in advertising costs to market a nationwide movie and a comedy have gotten out of hand?
I don't think they're out of hand, Steve. I think that they are what they are. It's very expensive to promote. They now have found ways to do it in unison with fast food companies or whatever, you know, partners, they spend $50 million and they'll take 25 million of it, and you'll see it on Arby's or McDonald's or Taco Bell or something like that. But at a hand, as Julian said earlier, they're all shooting for the stars. They're all looking at that $1 billion number, and because they know the potential is there to get that on a worldwide basis. And so they don't mind spending the big bucks, because they figure if they get 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6, certainly even 1 out of 10 that scores that big, it's worth going after it. So I don't know that it's out of control. I think that that's just part of the game.
Well, the other part of comedy that I think is sorely missing are family comedies, and we talk about taking the whole family to the movies. And I think one of the biggest successes I saw was the Ben Stiller comedy A Night at the Museum, which is technically a fantasy comedy. That's when you can take your 80-year-old grandmother and you can take your 10-year-old, and everybody actually enjoys the movie experience. And I would argue those movies have almost entirely disappeared. Now, you do have some comedy in the Marvel movies, but an outright comedy fantasy like A Night at the Museum is sorely missed.
Right. Like when they came out with this last summer, they had Deadpool and Wolverine, which was hugely funny, but it was also not a family film. I wouldn't take a little kid to see it.
Right, exactly.
But the big enchilada that the studios aim for is the demographic of youth. They want the teenagers, mid-20s, and that's why those franchise movies are out there all the time. They are very expensive.
But the thing is, in truth, Arthur, people don't go on dates to movies anymore unless it's a big movie. And that's the thing. You know, it used to be $8, $10 to go see take somebody to the movies. Now it's $50-$60 you have to drop to go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Michael, sneakers cost $150 and somehow kids find a way to buy them. They go to movies they want. Hot movies they go. They don't need to go with a date. They can go with their friends. They can go alone. They can go in any number of ways. But I think part of the problem is, aside from these event movies like Wicked or Barbie, Oppenheimer, nobody's talking about movies. This year particularly, it used to be there was a phrase that the most popular topics to talk about in any group are sex and movies. And I would say movies are pretty much off the table right now because Hollywood is not producing enough movies that say, we got to go see that movie. All of us here are big movie lovers, and we would go to the movies if we heard you got to see this movie. I cannot tell you the last time I really heard you got to see this movie. Now, I wanted to see Wicked because I enjoyed the play, the musical. I didn't say I'm got to see it, but I knew that it would be a big screen thing. And I think the rise of streaming has made it a big question now. Do I want to see that on the big screen? It used to be that you didn't have a choice. If you wanted to see the latest movie, you could see it in the theater. But now people, I make that decision every time. Do I want to pay the money, your $50 or $60 to go to see the movies, or should I wait till it comes on TV in 2 weeks?
Exactly, because most people nowadays have larger screen TVs. The average screen TV is 55 inches plus. And, why, get crowded into a movie theater when I could sit in my living room and watch Dune 2, or I could watch, any of the big blockbusters 3 weeks, 4 weeks after it comes out at the theater, when I could watch it in the comfort of my own home.
But it goes back, Mike, to the demarcation point I mentioned earlier, COVID, when people really started having no other choice, staying home and watching movies or watching streaming or watching and finding out how great a convenience it was. And, maybe younger people don't care about convenience, but people as we get on in years do care a lot about convenience. And there's nothing quite so, it's great to see a movie in the theater and laugh and scream and all that with other people. But what beats sitting home watching a great movie on your TV screen? And and you're seeing the clarity of the picture, the digital is fantastic. So
Well,
that's a key thing. What's to take them to go? I want to say one thing fast, and that is a movie coming. I actually want to go to the theater and see, and it's been a long time since I've done it. That's called Blue Moon, which is the story of Lorenz Hart, played by it's a Richard Linklater directing, and it's portrayed by Ethan Hawke.
oh,
I want to see that movie. It was done a lot of years ago, but it wasn't terrible.
wasn't it Mickey Rooney? Wasn't he playing Lorenz Hart?
Not good movie, yeah. But this could be great. Lorenz Hart was a genius. If you see the things that this guy wrote the lyrics to with Richard Rodgers, but he was really screwed up guy and had a lot of problems. And he's 5 feet tall, and he's drinking problems, drug problems. But out of this little man, came gems, of the lyrics for great hit songs in the American Songbook. I do want to see that movie.
Anybody ever can sit back and say the sleepless nights, the daily fights, the quick toboggan when you reach the heights, I miss the kisses and I miss the bites. I wish I were in love again.
Well said, Julian. I like that.
And thank you for not singing it.
No, I would not sing it. Not when we have Arthur, who was a professional singer.
Arthur,
we'll take Manhattan, the Bronx, and Staten Island too.
Arthur, sing a little ditty for us. Let me hear those pipes. Come on, just a little bit of something.
Hey guys, I think the voice is gone.
Yeah,
Gone with the wind.
Give me another one of those songs. Sinatra did the whole songbook of Rodgers and Hart. Did they do? I took a trip on a train and I thought about you.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a shadowy lane.
I don't think
they didn't do that, huh?
I don't think that's Rodgers and Hart.
One of those songs, though, right? One of those great songs.
He did plenty of
2 or 3 cars.
I want to go back to comedy. I want to go back to comedy and talk in terms of directors. And we know that in our lifetime, Woody Allen and Mel Brooks have put out the best and the most, I think, the highest grossing kind of films that we all loved. But I do want to talk about the Coen brothers. Arthur worked with them because they did their films are very offbeat, and they have a little of the black comedy that I'm talking about. Certainly Fargo has some wild comedy in it, but black comedy. And there's a terrific little movie I don't think did business called Burn After Reading. Really a good film with George Clooney and John Malkovich and Brad Pitt, and yet I don't know. Maybe it did do business. I don't think it did.
It will interest you to know that one of their little dark comedies called Barton Fink, which I loved, actually broke profit about 5 years ago.
Oh yeah, and that's a terrific film.
Little John Polito, Michael Lerner, John Goodman. Have you all seen that movie, guys?
Of course.
Oh, are you kidding? I love that movie.
It's interesting. Even folks like the Coen brothers, their last film they did together was done for streaming for Netflix.
Yes.
And
they get money. They get paid. Yeah. Come on.
But that's where a lot of the directors and filmmakers are turning.
You want to be stupefied, guys? What do you think the Coen brothers' True Grit did worldwide in box office? Take a guess. True Grit.
Actually, Jeff Bridges. That was a big hit here. So I would say,
I'd guess 300 million.
Well, okay, you're in the ballpark.
First time I've been in the ballpark in years.
You're in it. $252 million. True Grit.
Who says
when John Wayne did it did $33 million. Of course, it was way back when.
Yes.
Had a great song, but that's a big hit. True Grit.
I go back to Kind Hearts and Coronets. Now, I'll bet none of you've seen that one. Have you?
I've seen it years ago, yes. Anybody here see Good Morning Vietnam?
Oh, yes.
Robin Williams. Hello.
Good morning, Vietnam.
Yeah. But I don't consider that a comedy, though, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, it was funny. It was a
dramedy. It was a
dramedy.
Dramedy, yeah.
Definitely.
How about Barry Levinson did a little movie called Avalon? Don't cut the turkey.
You cut the turkey.
That's some very funny stuff in that. We probably missed some, but we've got a lot of them. The fact of the matter is, the bottom line is, they're not making them anymore, and that's a problem.
Well, we need more Mel Brooks type directors. We need more Woody Allen type directors. We need more Elaine Mays. We got to get Elaine May back in the saddle. Julian, is she going to be directing anything anytime soon?
Actually, there is a film, but I can't talk about it. But yes, there is a film right now that is very close to starting to shoot. We're hoping sometime the end of this summer.
And here's the big question: is it a comedy?
Oh, it's a comedy. It's funny. It is funny.
What's the theme, Julian? Can you say that?
I'm a little concerned. I'm not sure what I can say. I'll just say that it's a romantic comedy. I will say that.
Right.
And it has not only great humor, but it has the most offbeat story that we've talked about, that none of us have talked about, but a very offbeat kind of comedy. In the style, as you said earlier, off of Heartbreak Kid, even though Neil wrote it, it's that kind of style.
Right.
So,
speaking of romantic comedies, if I may, has there ever been anybody better at it than Cary Grant?
No. And His Girl Friday, the remake of The Front Page, which was made 3 times in our lifetime, well, 2 out of 3 in our lifetime, is as funny as any movie you'll ever see.
He's on this list. Yes.
And is it quick? That dialogue between Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell is as fast as any 2 actors have ever done since James Cagney and Pat O'Brien.
His Girl Friday is rated number 19 by the AFI. It's funniest movie ever made.
Speaking of Billy Wilder and James Cagney, 1, 2, 3.
Great movie.
Very funny movie. Takes place in Berlin during the Cold War, and I have to say I laughed out loud. And the dialogue that James Cagney spits out is just wonderful.
Unbelievable. How about Horst Buchholz? How about that?
The romantic lead.
Fresh from the Magnificent Seven, exactly.
Billy Wilder did some great movies, including the dark comedy. Certainly wouldn't call Ace in the Hole a dark comedy, but he did do several of those kind of movies that were.
The Fortune Cookie was a pretty funny,
half a great movie. Yeah.
I mean, even Stalag 17, which is a World War II prisoner of war camp movie, that is a classic dramedy because there's lots of comedy there supplied by Robert Strauss and Harvey Lembeck, but it's a very dramatic story. Yeah, no, it's very, very true. Well, we've come to the end of our show, guys, and I thought we had a few laughs. I thought we brought out some classics, and here's hoping, well, at least Elaine may be fulfilling one of those wishes down the line. We'll get some more comedies, and I promise you that I will be selling one of my comedies soon.
Well, here's to that, Steve. And we did mention bananas.
Yes, the bananas, exactly. Any type of fruit work.
And Take the Money and Run. And the Gub. And the Gub.
And the Fish Called Wanda. We missed a lot.
Love and Death. Michael Faber, our host, our producer, our chief bottle washer, it's your show.
Well, it's all of our shows, but thank you, sir. You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember you couldn't do this without you. So we want to hear from you. So please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you can find us wherever fine podcasts are found. And now you could even find us up on our YouTube channel. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? Or if you're listening to us, please give us 5 stars. If you're into social media, please check us out up on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening this week on their podcast. Julian, who are you talking to this week?
Well, this week I'm talking to the director Barry Sonnenfeld, and we're going to be talking about Men in Black and Addams Family, all these incredible big movies that he made. And on top of it, I didn't realize that he's also a cinematographer before he became a director and shot Raising Arizona, for example. And so I'm interested. I think you'll enjoy that show.
Yep, definitely fun stuff ahead of that one. Steve, who are you talking about on your show this week?
Avi Hearn, my film historian friend, and I dissect one of the great Cold War thrillers of all time, 7 Days in May. John Frankenheimer and Rod Serling teamed up on that one. So we really give you everything you always wanted to know about that wonderful Cold War thriller.
That is awesome. Arthur, what's coming up next week on our podcast?
Well, what's coming up is Steve Rubin will be the star of this podcast, because our podcast next week will be all about several of the most popular notes in the history of music. Da 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 da. We're talking James Bond, about the series, the history. No one knows it better than Steve, who's written a great book on it. And so we're talking James Bond.
Awesome. So Steve is going to be shaken, not stirred. That's perfect. Awesome.
Good one, Mike.
On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We'll see you next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
Holy podcast! It's Howdy Mike Gordon.
Howdy!
What are you doing here, Mike?
Well, Drew, I'm here to talk Batman 66, of course.
Batman 66?
That's right, folks. Join Drew Leiter and I every Wednesday for the Bat Chums podcast. We will discuss, recap, and review the Batman 60 series episode by episode.
Same bat time, same bat channel. Come on, Bat Chum. We don't have one moment to lose.
Don't worry, the worst is yet to come.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping for the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.